Two it is. Chris in Idaho, you are on with Seth and Matt, and it says, let's say someone rose from the dead and said they were sent by God, that should be sufficient evidence. Okay, that's what the call screen said. Is that essentially your point?
Yeah, that's my point. So obviously the claim has to be made first. Otherwise you would have a right to be like, why should we consider whatever this person is doing to be of God?
Sure.
So obviously the claim has to be made first. And then if the claim is followed up by something that defies the laws of nature.
Yeah. So let's give your position the full benefit of the doubt. Let's imagine that my grandmother died. That's not imagining. She actually died a month or so ago, and I went to the funeral. And unless I was somehow fooled, and that was a fake body in the casket, as long as we had good confirmation that she was actually dead. If my grandma walked into the show right now, and I knew her, and she was able to communicate, and it was clearly her, and she told me that she had been sent from God, your view is that would be sufficient evidence to just believe that, in fact, there is a God who sent her back.
Well, I mean, obviously, I think it's all based on you viewing the body, seeing the burial, seeing all those things take place.
Well, paint the scenario for me that you have in your mind. No. Tell me
all the things that.
What's the situational in your mind that you're talking about? Someone dies.
Yeah, so I guess I'm coming in here presupposing, the existence of God. So this is, I'm referring to the Jesus, him claiming to be God. So.
Okay, yeah, but how do you know? How do you know that Jesus existed and actually claimed to be God? We'll start right there.
Well, I think that with the existence,
okay, you lost me at the words, I think. Okay, what I want to know is, how do you know, right? How do you know that Jesus existed and rose from the dead? How did you come by this information?
Well, obviously, the Gospels are the first starting point.
Okay, who wrote those?
Reading over that.
You don't know who wrote the Gospels?
Disciples. So Matthew, Mark.
No.
There may have been other authors.
No. That's false. Stop. So Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John were not written by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Those are names attributed by the church. Pick up a Bible. Any modern Bible will tell you that. The authorship of the Gospels is unknown. But that's irrelevant because we don't have any way to question the source or anything else. So you're getting this information from a book. Let's assume, Seth and I have a mild disagreement about the think no thing, but I'm going to let him.
No. Go ahead.
Well,
what's going on?
You were using no. The disagreement faded because you were using no in the sense of how are you aware of this, not how does this count as knowledge of a fact.
Are you getting philosophical on me?
Yes.
Shit. All right. So how do you know? Well, what I'm saying, if the Gospels were written by anonymous authors who were not Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, they were written long decades after the alleged life of Christ. This is thousands of years later, meaning that this stuff's been sort of passed down and changed and altered and retranslated and whatnot. And even now, with all the information technology we have, we can't source the original story. How do you know it happened? And I think that's the spirit of my question.
Yes.
Well, I think just like the time, the demographic and all that. So just, him being within the Roman Empire, just interacting with, people that were sick during that time.
How would you come by that knowledge?
Pilate, all those things are,
do you see where I'm going?
Discovering the tomb and all that.
Yeah. So you keep going back.
They're not considered witnesses. Go ahead.
You keep going back to the claims. Everything about this story is claims. Where's the evidence for the claims?
Okay. Well, you do have to accept it on. You have to take a step in faith.
Okay. No, I don't.
With the whole thing.
No,
well, he's saying you would have to. You would have to.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought he was saying
you
that
are
we
required.
have to. Forgive me for misunderstanding, my friend. I'm sorry about that.
So here's the thing.
I was saying,
if you have to take a step of faith, and then the way that you're using it, you're saying you have to begin to believe even in the absence of evidence. Is there anything, any claim, or any position that anybody could ever present that you wouldn't then be justified in saying, well, I'm taking it on faith?
well, I mean, any type of situation or any type of religion, I guess.
Okay, why are you carving out a special block for religion?
You have to take the same. You would have to take the same step.
So if a devout Muslim then believes in Islam,
validity.
If a devout Muslim believes the Quran on faith, then you would give them equal credence. You'd give that equal weight. You would hold to the Islamic faith too.
I would say that they, because in their culture, that's what they're being presented with and everything, that it's likely that they're going to accept that.
Yeah, I'm not talking about belief. I want to know.
Cultural influence.
I'm not talking about what they believe. I want to say.
We're talking about your criteria for belief. If your criteria would also be used by a Muslim to support it, why aren't you also a Muslim?
This is something John Loftus calls the outsider test for faith, right? If you're going to accept a faith claim based on your in-group religion, are you willing then to receive with equal enthusiasm the faith claim of every other religion?
So this is what's the word? To distinguish Christ from Muhammad. Muhammad was more of a warrior, kind of like, let's fight for, the faith.
At times, but why is that? No, stop.
Stuff like that. And
Chris, hey, trust me, I'm not trying to beat you up. I'm trying to save you from yourself. Because what we're asking about, if your reason for believing that Jesus was divine and rose from the dead is because you first have to take an exercise of faith and accept what the book says about it, and a Muslim were to take that same exercise of faith and accept what their book says about it, in order for you to be intellectually consistent, to have good standards of evidence, you would then be in a position where you would be forced to accept both of these. And when we ask about that, you just start trash talking that Muhammad isn't the type of person that you would believe in.
I'm just saying that you have to distinguish the two. You have to look at both religions and come to your, obviously that's the first step.
But if you're drawing a conclusion, how do you draw that conclusion? What's your criteria? Do you accept or reject on faith, or do you look beyond faith?
Okay, well, I know that earlier, Seth, I heard somebody talking about the watchmaker, and you said that, why believe in a God who doesn't interact with reality, and you kind of dismissed.
That's not what I said.
Experience.
That's not what I said. What I said was it wouldn't make any difference to our lives if a watchmaker, designer agency did exist.
The deistic God that doesn't intervene is an irrelevant, useless God. You have no more reason to believe in it. You have no reason to care what it thinks about. You have no reason, none of this. But where are you going? Because I promise.
Okay,
I know
where I'm going here. Okay,
hang on.
So this is
hang on.
Go ahead.
I want to try and be as clear with you as possible. Some of the questions that we ask in this Socratic process are definitely traps. That's why they feel like traps. But when we use them, it's not an intent to expose you as being a buffoon. It's an attempt to get you to recognize that you are engaged in double standards, that you have a standard that you apply to Christianity for some reason, which you don't apply to other religions. And when we ask why you do that, then you're like, well, because Muhammad was more of a warlord. Well, what the hell does that have to do with whether or not the claims are true?
Okay. Well, this is, I can see where you're going. Okay. You're saying, they're basically this, why don't, Muslims have just more of a reason to accept that than Christians do?
No, what I'm saying is that
just being presented with a book, correct?
What I'm saying is that your epistemology, your foundation do you care about what's true and not true?
Of course I do.
Is faith a reliable path to truth?
I would say, to be honest with you, probably not.
Okay.
Christopher Hitchens has a great quote. Oh, forgive me, Matt.
No.
Go ahead.
That's all we were trying to get you to realize is that if you care about the truth and you provide a method, like if I want to know how wide this table is and I have a ruler that I don't know if it's reliable, or what good would it do for me to use that ruler to try and measure it if I don't already know that it's accurate? And when you get to the point where you acknowledge that, hang on, faith probably isn't a reliable pathway to truth because faith could lead me to false claims. If you truly care about truth, then you want to reform the process by which you make decisions about what's believable so that you can weed out the false things, or as many false things as you can, and keep the true things. And so if you have good reason to believe in Jesus or Muhammad or crystal healing or whatever it is, if you have good reason and evidence for it, then you should accept it. And so should we, and we would. But if you don't, then acknowledging that is the first step to getting to the point where I'm not trying to say, hey, let's end this call with Chris saying, yep, I was wrong, I'm an atheist. All I'm trying to get Chris to say is the reason that I believe some things doesn't seem to be warranted, and I need to go out and continue asking questions and explore this because the things I believe might also not be warranted. And if it turns out they are, then you can call back and share it with us and tell anybody, and then we'll all know what the truth is.
And you won't know it by faith.
Well, I think there's one thing that you guys dismiss, and I don't think that you should. I think personal experience.
Something. Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, well, I'm just saying you have to be able to. Okay, so if God is going to interact with us, okay, so you have to think about. Obviously, He's not visible to us.
Why not?
He's in a different.
You're making all kinds of claims about God that are part of the reason why you haven't come up with a good way to test for this, because you clearly have assumptions about God. God's not visible to us. How do you know that, and why would it be true?
Well, obviously, we don't see Him interact within our physical experience.
Obviously, obviously what?
Well, I agree that we don't see that, but
obviously He's not here physically interacting with us.
So here's the thing:
the way that He is going to interact, if there being a God, is He's going to interact in a more personal way.
How do you know that?
Us, if He's spiritual.
How do you know that?
I mean, to me, it makes sense. That's how He would interact.
Why does it make sense to you?
On a personal level.
If either of us were to just say that you're wrong because that what makes sense to us, would that be remotely convincing?
It wouldn't.
I know.
I know where you're going. Okay.
I didn't mean.
I know you know where.
I didn't mean to walk on you.
Yeah, and I didn't mean to cut you off.
The host in me was jumping out.
Yeah.
But look, I want you to remember a famous quote by the late Christopher Hitchens. He said, "It's called faith because it's not knowledge." Right? If we genuinely know something, there's no need to take it on faith. And if you're going to accept it on faith, then you're going to have to play in the arena where every other religion, every other belief system, every other truth claim, playing the faith card gets equal treatment. Otherwise, you're being a hypocrite about faith. I think faith is a terrible way to determine what is true or not true. And I would encourage you to, I don't want to just believe. Let's go out and know, or try to know. And if we can't find the answer, instead of making one up or accepting it on faith, we simply are honest with ourselves and others and just say it. I don't know. I hope to one day know, and make that truth journey about an evidence-based exploration of facts and sort of a journey toward knowledge, with no faith at all in play.
And I don't want to beat up your other point, but let me ask you a couple of quick questions, and I will let you expand after that. Do you believe that there are people who are being abducted by aliens?
Absolutely not.
Okay. Now, a minute ago, before I rudely interrupted you to make a point, you were about to talk about how we dismiss personal testimony. Now, we don't. If somebody gives me their personal testimony about something, I am willing to accept that they have had an experience and that they are honestly trying to describe their understanding and interpretation of that experience as best they can. But that doesn't mean that I am warranted to believe their conclusion. And if you're going to come in, and this is like a preemptive thing, if you were going to come in to talk about how we should have been more accepting of personal testimony, then it's worth noting that you don't accept the personal testimony of people who've claimed they've been abducted by aliens. And that is a claim that isn't in any way supernatural, that is fairly common, and where you can actually go and speak and interview the people who will tell you these stories. You have none of those things for the Jesus story. There's nobody you can interview from then. There's no evidence that you can appeal to. And the personal testimony that you're appealing to is a copy of a translation of a copy of an oral tradition from an anonymous source. How can that possibly be more reliable than my Aunt Josephine telling you about the time that she saw a spaceship and time stopped and she was, abducted and probed? How could you possibly consider that more reliable than my aunt?
Right. I mean, well, this is something that I appreciate you guys, covering all this. And I mean, I listen to the show, so, I'm trying to figure out there, if there is a God, okay, he's gonna do what he can. Like, there's got to be a way for us to be able to detect him.
Let me leave.
I wish that were the case.
Let me leave you with this. If there is a benevolent God, he will already know what it takes. I'm borrowing from one of your lines. He'll already know what it takes to prove himself to you. He won't be a mystery. He won't be a puzzle you have to solve. He won't be a gauntlet you have to run through. A genuinely loving, benevolent, caring deity won't make it a Rubik's Cube that you have to somehow figure out. Parents don't put their messages of love and protection to their earthbound children in code. They express it in ways that the child can understand. If a benevolent God existed, I believe this would have already happened. And if that God is not benevolent and does not care about us, I don't know that I care about that God at all. I mean,
there may be a God that exists, but if he's a dick, I'll believe he exists. I just don't want anything to do with him. But the bigger issue here is not about the character of God. It's about recognizing the assumptions that we make and how they color our ability to investigate the claims. And you, it seems, either through what you were taught as a kid or what you desired or what you learned as you explored, came up with some notion of God and now seem to be trying to find the evidence and lead it towards that conclusion. I would just...
You want it to be true. You do want it to be true. You know what I mean? Like, because it's...
There are things that I wish were so. Like, I wish we didn't have to die. I wish that there wasn't illness. I wish that there wasn't poverty. I wish that people weren't as cruel as they can be.
I wish I could see people I've lost in this world in a life 2.0 somewhere, where there was no pain and we could be together.
But I don't actually wish for a God. And to reference Hitchens again, there's a great quote from him, which I'm not going to get right, but about how strange and perverted it would be if there's a God that's up there watching and monitoring everything and like taking notes on what you, like Santa Claus, and knows whether you've been bad or good, and he's going to fuck you up later if you don't do these things, or he sits around and watches you masturbate. Hey, you're welcome.
Well, I know, but then you think about all that, and I mean, there's a part of us that I think, to be honest with you, I mean, it's kind of taking a step here, but I'm saying I think these are things that God implanted in us, is that desire for justice. So you think about people who, mistreat others or just do
why would I need a God
things.
to implant? Why would I need a God to implant a desire for justice? Don't I just have to be somebody who doesn't want to be mistreated? Isn't that enough to have a foundation to desire justice?
And is it possible? Is it possible that we, as fragile, frail, temporary human beings, some of us find comfort in constructing the method for coping, saying that there is a designer, there is a master plan, there is a heaven, there is a reunion with those we loved, there is a reason for everything that happens, tragic or otherwise. There's a comfort in that. Can you see that maybe human beings might have constructed those ideas as a coping mechanism, but they're still human ideas?
No, I've already explored all that. Like, it can, if you think about it, it can make, that makes sense that, because you want these horrible people to pay the price, and, like Hitler, Stalin, what better place for them than to be, in hell, you know what I mean? So it's like,
yeah, except that according to those same religions that want that kind of justice, that's where I'm going too. You want me to go to hell? Do I deserve it?
Well, I mean, that's a completely separate thing. But
no, it's not.
Well, of course, I don't want anybody, to burn.
Do Catholic? Do you think
it seems pretty extreme?
Yeah, but I mean, this was about whether or not it's deserved. But so, do you think Catholics go to heaven?
Do I think Catholics go to heaven? You know what? The way I look at it is, I'm not the judge of the heart.
Okay, but I mean, you're not excluding it as a possibility, though.
No,
Hitler was Catholic.
I mean, I think anybody is.
Hitler was Catholic.
To go, right?
Maybe he's in heaven. Maybe you should come party with the rest of us.
I guess
that's a joke. I
was like, good luck. You're going to be quote mined.
That is
tomorrow
not an argument for or against the notion of God.
Yeah.
That was a glib little thing.
All right. Mostly, I just want to encourage you to, to remember that Hitch quote. It's called faith because it's not knowledge, and use that as a framework as you approach not just religious issues but others, and see if there might be greater satisfaction in pursuing knowledge over mere belief.
Right. Okay.
I appreciate your time,
guys.
Chris, and you keep exploring. Call us back definitely call us back if you find like solid evidence and non-faith-based reasons to believe something, because that's one of the reasons we're not just doing the show because we're right and you're wrong and rah rah rah.
Right.
I was, I continue to study these things and care about it. Am I think I'm ever going to actually be convinced there's a God? No, but that's a statistical likelihood based on, the past, that, we've been waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting for evidence. And the best things we ever get are the types of things that you're referencing, where somebody has to take a leap of faith. And I begin with this notion of God and a desire for justice. And it just feels so much better if this is true. And it also seems to give an explanation for things that I don't know. And that's comforting because the anxiety of not knowing is terrifying for humans.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's just it's something I'm going to continue seeking. It's
good.
It's a journey.
But with you guys being in that position of, I'm not convinced that that God exists. You are saying basically there is no God. Or I
okay.
Guess
so if I say I'm not convinced,
right?
No. If I say I'm not convinced you're guilty, does that mean I'm saying you're innocent?
If you're saying that you're convinced...
If somebody accuses you of something and I say, I'm not convinced that Chris is guilty, am I in any way declaring you innocent?
I would say, yes, you are.
You are mistaken, sir.
Am I?
Yes.
Well,
saying that you are innocent saying I'm not...
Say, hey, I don't...
Chris.
Go ahead.
Saying I'm not convinced you did this is completely separate from whether or not I am convinced that you did it or didn't do it.
So you're kind of on the fence, so it's in between. Is that kind of...
I may not be convinced of either possibility because there hasn't been sufficient evidence. But I'm just talking about the statement. If I say I am not convinced that Chris did that crime, that is not identical to I am convinced that Chris did not do that crime. Do you see the distinction between them?
Yeah, I can see it. So
that's it. Try not to expand it beyond that. I know that it's not everybody thinks in these terms, and I am definitely pedantic and persnickety and analytical.
Exactly.
But it helps because I do care about believing as many true things and as few false things as possible. And you have to have both of those components. Because if you want to believe as many true things as possible, you believe everything. And if you want to believe as few false things as possible, you believe nothing. but neither of those are good solutions. So what you're looking for is to get your internal model of reality to match reality as best as it can. And that means we need good methods to distinguish between what's real and what's not real. Faith is not that method any more than flipping a coin or making an assumption. But there are good methods out there. The scientific methods that we've developed, skepticism, critical thinking, this evaluation of evidence, logical arguments, understanding logical fallacies, those are all there to keep us from being more wrong, because that's where the danger lies.
Right. I see. Okay. Well, I mean, and I have, looked into a lot of those logical, fallacy arguments and all that since I've started listening to you guys, like the argument from ignorance and all that.
Mm-hmm.
So, I'm getting more familiar with them. But hey, guys, I appreciate you taking my call, and I'll definitely give you a call back. So
I'd appreciate that, Chris. I really would. Thank you
very much.
Yeah. We've got like 3 more calls we're going to get to. We're definitely going to run over. By the way, a couple things. We're here at the Atheist Community of Austin's Free Thought